Greetings, it's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt. What actually determines whether a merger and acquisition succeeds? You might immediately think about purchase price, valuation, financing, market share, or synergies. And those things certainly matter. But there's another part of the transaction that can determine whether all of those financial projections ever become reality. People. A company does not simply acquire buildings, technology, patents, customers, or financial assets. It also acquires knowledge, relationships, teams, leadership systems, organizational culture, and different ways of working. And if leaders mishandle those human elements, they can destroy some of the very value they paid to acquire. Welcome to the 10th and final video in our series on mergers and acquisitions. In this final lesson, I want to examine diversity, equity, and inclusion in mergers and acquisitions from a practical leadership perspective. Not a slogan, not a political statement, but as a part of a disciplined decision-making process. Because when organizations combine leaders, they must make difficult decisions about who participates, who leads, which jobs remain, how people are evaluated, which practices survive, and what the future organization will look like. Those decisions have consequences for talent, customers, culture, risk, innovation, and ultimately the financial success of the transaction. So let's start with better decisions. One of the first lessons is simple. Having different people in the room is not enough. What matters is whether relevant perspectives actually influence the decision. Imagine an acquisition team evaluating a company in a market that the acquiring organization does not fully understand. The financial analysts may understand the numbers, the attorneys may understand the legal structure, senior executives may understand the strategy. But what about the employees who understand the technology? What about the people who know the customers? What about leaders who understand the local market, workforce, culture, accessibility issues, or other supplier relationships? In those perspectives, never reach the decision makers. The company may have important information available and still make a poor decision. That is one reason inclusive decision making can reduce groupthink. And groupthink can become very expensive during an acquisition. A deal team becomes especially vulnerable when everyone begins reinforcing the same assumptions. Someone needs to be willing to ask, what are we missing? What evidence would cause us to reconsider this deal? What assumptions are built into our valuation? What could go wrong during integration? And are people on the team actually comfortable raising those concerns? The last question matters because in a high-pressure transaction, silence does not necessarily mean agreement. Sometimes it means people are afraid to disagree. Bias can become a business risk. Bias can also enter an acquisition in surprisingly ordinary ways. Leaders may favor people who think like them. They may assume that acquiring companies' systems are automatically better. They may give greater credibility to employees at corporate headquarters. They may rely heavily on job titles rather than actual capability. Or they may become so enthusiastic about a target company that they begin looking primarily for information that confirms what they already believe. This is confirmation bias. And in an acquisition, confirmation bias can become extremely costly. The solution is not simply telling people, don't be biased. Leaders need better processes. Define the criteria before making the decision. Use evidence. Ask comparable questions. Invite independent challenge. Document important assumptions. And they make sure someone has permission to say, I don't think the evidence supports this. Good governance makes disagreement useful. Due diligence has to include people. Traditional due diligence often focuses heavily on financial statements, contracts, liabilities, intellectual property, and operations. But leaders also need to understand the workforce they are acquiring. Who holds the critical knowledge? Which employees manage important customer relationships? Where are the strongest leaders? What skills would be difficult to replace? Why are employees staying? Why are they leaving? How are people promoted? How are compensation decisions made? What does the culture reward? And perhaps more importantly, which parts of the target company are actually producing the value that attracted the buyer in the first place? Consider a technology company acquiring a smaller firm because it wants its engineers, innovation, and customer relationships. After the acquisition, the buyer centralizes decision making, eliminates what it considers duplicate positions, and forces the smaller company to adopt all of its existing practices. On a spreadsheet, that may look efficient, but what happens if the employees who created the innovation leave? What happens if customers lose people they trusted? What happens if smaller companies' culture was actually one of the reasons it was so successful? The acquiring company may achieve cost savings while simultaneously destroying the strategic reason for the acquisition. That's not synergy. That is value destruction. Design the organization before choosing the people. Another important principle is this: design the future organization before deciding who gets the jobs. During a merger, there can be enormous pressure to decide quickly who will lead. That can easily become political. Instead, leaders should first determine what the combined organization needs. What work needs to be done? What capabilities are required? Where should decisions be made? Which positions are necessary? What should success in those roles look like? Only after answering those questions should leaders begin selecting people. Then candidates can be evaluated against the requirements of the future organization rather than simply asking who had the bigger title before the merger, who works for the acquiring company, who has the strongest relationship with senior leadership, or who seems most like us. The object is not to guarantee equal outcomes between the two organizations. The object is to create a fair, evidence-based process that selects the strongest team for the future. Workforce reductions require the same discipline. Of course, mergers and acquisitions sometimes create duplicate positions. Layoffs may be necessary, but even when a difficult decision is economically justified, the process still matters. Suppose leaders are told to eliminate 15% of corporate positions and are asked to select employees based on performance, adaptability, and culture fit. That last phrase should immediately raise questions. What exactly does cultural fit mean? Does it mean performance, collaboration, adaptability? Or does it simply mean that someone communicates, behaves, or thinks like people already in power? Vague criteria create room for inconsistent decisions. Better criteria are observable, job-related, and connected to the future organization, and leaders should review the results carefully. A process can appear neutral and still create unintended consequences. The point of view, those outcomes, is not to automatically assume discrimination occurred. It is to ask whether the process actually worked as intended. Culture integration is not about winning. Another mistake organizations make is threatening integration, as if one company won and the other lost. The acquiring organization simply imposes its systems, language, leadership practices, and culture. But the goal of integration should not necessarily be to preserve either legacy organization. The goal should be to create the best future organization. Sometimes the acquiring company has the stronger practice. Sometimes the target company does. And sometimes both need to change. That requires leaders to ask which practices create value, which behaviors support the strategy, what should we preserve, what should we change, and what should we create together. The strongest integration is not automatically the one that makes the target company look more like the buyer. It is the one that best supports the strategic purpose of the transaction. Employees judge leaders by what they experience. Communication becomes especially important during this period. Employees want to know, do I still have a job? Who will I report to? What happens to my pay and benefits? Will my work location change? Will my team still exist? What happens next? Leaders may need or may not know every answer immediately. This is understandable. But uncertainty should not become an excuse for silence. A better message is, here is what we know. Here is what we have not decided. Here is when we expect to know more. And here is where you can ask questions. Employees usually understand that mergers involve uncertainty. What damages trust when leadership pretends uncertainty does not exist or makes promises that cannot be kept. People judge the future culture through what leaders actually do, especially during the first days and weeks of integration. Customers matter too. The same thinking must extend beyond employees. Imagine two banks merge and decide to close branches based entirely on transaction volume. Financially, that may seem logical. But what if one branch serves customers who have limited transportation? What if digital access is lower in that community? What if the branch has unusually strong customer relationships? What if closing it causes deposits to leave the bank? Suddenly, what appeared to be a simple cost reduction decision may affect revenue, reputation, and long-term customer loyalty. Good mergers and acquisition leadership looks beyond the immediate spreadsheet. It asks how decisions affect the entire value system around the organization, employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and investors. So, measure what actually matters. Finally, organizations need to measure whether integration is working, not simply how many people from different backgrounds are present. Representation alone does not tell leaders whether an organization is healthy. Instead, ask questions such as, are critical employees staying? Are customers staying? Are people able to raise concerns? Are promotion and selection systems working fairly? Is regrettable turnover increasing? Are important suppliers being lost? Are accessibility problems being resolved? Are employees beginning to trust the new leadership? And most importantly, is the organization delivering the value that justified the acquisition? Measurement should help leaders make better decisions. Otherwise, it becomes reporting for the sake of reporting. The bigger leadership lesson, the larger lesson is that diversity, equity, and inclusion create value in mergers and acquisitions when they improve the quality of decisions, when they help leaders identify risks, when they protect access to talent, when they expose assumptions, when they preserve important customer relationships, when they create fair and defensible processes, and when they help the new organization use the capabilities of the people it has acquired. None of this means leaders should avoid difficult decisions. Sometimes jobs will be eliminated, facilities will close, leadership will change, systems will be standardized, and people will disagree with the outcome. Responsible leadership does not mean avoiding those decisions. It means connecting them to strategy, supporting them with evidence, applying criteria consistently, examining their consequences, and communicating with people respectfully. And this brings us to the end of our series on mergers and acquisitions. Throughout these videos, we've examined strategy, valuation, financing, governance, negotiation, takeover tactics, integration, and many of the decisions leaders face when organizations combine. But perhaps the most important lesson is that none of these issues exist independently. A brilliant acquisition strategy can fail because of poor integration. An attractive valuation can become meaningless if critical talent leaves. Expected synergies can disappear if customers leave, and financially sound transactions can still struggle when leaders underestimate culture, communication, and trust. Successful mergers and acquisitions require leaders to see the entire system. The numbers matter, the strategies matter, the legal structures matter, but people ultimately have to make the combined organization work. The best leaders understand that creating value from an acquisition does not end when the agreement is signed. That's when some of the most important leadership work begins. Thank you for joining me throughout this series on mergers and acquisitions. If you found these lessons useful, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and explore the other videos in this series. And as you think about organizations you lead, work for, invest in, or study, I'll leave you with one final question. If two organizations combined, what would you do to make sure the new organization becomes better than either company was before the deal? I hope that you have a great day, because only you get to choose how you feel about it. I'm Dr. Paul Gerhardt. Thank you for watching.